I went into the woods that afternoon because I needed a break from everything. Work had been getting to me, and I felt like my head was full of noise I couldn't shut off. I decided to take a long walk in a forest about an hour from my place. I had been there once before with friends, but that day I wanted to go alone. I didn't think anything bad would happen. I wasn't doing anything stupid. I just wanted quiet. The sky was gray when I parked, and the air smelled like wet dirt and pine. It looked like it might rain later, but I didn't care. I liked hiking in cold air. The first hour felt perfect. The trail was soft from old leaves, and I kept hearing wind brushing through the branches. Everything looked normal. Tall trees, patches of moss, small muddy sections, tiny streams running down slopes. I took my time, moving deeper and deeper, trying to clear my mind. But the farther I walked, the more the trail changed. At first it narrowed, then it split, then it twisted in ways I didn't remember. I wasn't worried at first. I told myself I'd just turn back later, but I wasn't paying attention to where I stepped or what direction I was heading. I kept drifting toward areas that looked interesting, and before I knew it, the trail under my feet was no longer a real trail at all. It looked more like an old footpath made by deer or something. I stopped and looked around. Everything looked the same no matter where I turned. Dark trunks, fallen logs, a thick carpet of leaves. The sky barely showed through. I checked my phone, no signal. I told myself to stay calm. I'd gotten turned around before on hikes. Usually you just pick a direction, walk straight long enough, and eventually hit a road, a stream, a clearing, something that tells you where you are. So I picked a direction and started walking. Right away something felt different. The forest got quieter. Even the wind felt muted, like the trees were blocking it out. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. Every breath I took sounded too loud. Every step felt sharp. I didn't see any animals, not even birds or squirrels. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin feel too tight. I kept walking, trying to shake it off. The ground dipped and rose in weird angles, like the place didn't want to be easy to walk on. After a while, I came across a big fallen tree covered in dark moss. I stepped over it and kept going. But maybe 10 minutes later, I saw another tree that looked exactly the same. Same angle, same twist in the trunk, same thick moss. I paused, staring at it, trying to convince myself it was just coincidence. I walked on, faster this time. A few minutes later, my foot hit the same soft mound next to the same fallen tree again. My heart started beating faster. I checked my compass app. It spun around uselessly, refusing to settle. I tried to calm down, but panic was creeping in. I took longer steps, trying to force myself in a straight line, pushing through bushes and branches, not caring if they scratched me. Then I heard a sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft crunch of leaves behind me. Slow, controlled, like someone stepping lightly but not lightly enough. I froze. Every muscle in my body tightened. I stared into the trees but saw nothing except darkness between the trunks. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, but the sound was too exact, too human. I walked again, faster. I listened so hard that my head started to hurt. Every few steps, I thought I heard another faint sound behind me. Another small shift of leaves, a twig pressing down, the slightest thump of weight on dirt. Every time I looked back, the woods were still. I kept going, breathing harder, feeling sweat on my back even though the air was cold. The ground sloped downward after a while, and I followed the slope, thinking it might lead to water. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to move faster. The trees grew so tight around me that I had to push my way through, branches scraping my arms. Finally, the slope evened out, opening into a small, shallow clearing. The ground there was muddy. That's where I saw footprints. Fresh ones. They were deep in the mud, spaced apart like someone had been walking calmly, not running. They were bigger than mine. Clear tread marks. No sign of weathering or drying. They led from one side of the clearing to the other, disappearing back into the trees. And they weren't mine. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I crouched down to look closer. The prints were sharp-edged. Whoever made them had been there not long before I walked into that clearing. I stood up, shaking. I felt exposed out in the open, like anything in the trees could see me clearly. I didn't want to follow the prints, but I also didn't want to go back the way I came. So I picked the opposite direction and walked as fast as I could, almost half running. As I moved, I heard that soft crunch again somewhere behind me, farther back than before, but definitely there. Slow, steady, following, not rushing, not trying to catch up, just tracking me. I didn't look back anymore. I was afraid that if I looked, I'd see someone standing there. Or worse, I wouldn't see anything at all. The woods got darker. The sky barely showed. The trees felt too close, like they were leaning in. Every step I took felt heavier. My mouth felt dry, and my legs burned, but I kept going. I started to feel like I had been walking for hours, but the light hadn't changed much. It was like time stopped working normally in there. My mind kept replaying the footprints. Fresh, deep, calm. Someone who didn't care if I knew they had been there. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I spotted something through the trees. A thin, straight line of pale brown. I pushed through the branches and stepped onto a narrow dirt service road. I almost collapsed from relief. Seeing a man-made path felt like coming up for air after drowning. I followed the road, barely able to keep my pace steady because my legs were shaking so badly. Each step felt like a small victory. After a long stretch, I saw something familiar through the trees, bright metal reflecting the dim light. My car. I walked faster, almost stumbling. When I got to the door, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the lock. I opened it, slid inside, and shut the door, breathing in sharp, heavy bursts. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the tree line, and then I saw movement. A figure stepped between two trees, not rushing, not trying to hide, just standing there tall and still. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark outline. The posture looked relaxed, comfortable, like they had been there for a while, like they had been watching me walk back to my car. I didn't wait. I started the engine and drove away fast, not looking into the mirror. I didn't feel safe until I was back on the main road with open space on both sides. That night, when I got home, I checked my clothes. Small scratches on my arms, dirt on my pants, and a tiny piece of dark green fabric stuck to one of my jacket buttons. I didn't own anything green. Someone had brushed past me in those woods, close enough to leave something on me without me noticing. Maybe when I pushed through a narrow path. Maybe when I stopped to listen. Maybe when I froze in the clearing. I'll never know. What I do know is this. I wasn't alone for most of that hike. Someone else was out there, moving silently, watching my steps, staying just far enough back that I could never see them. And when I finally escaped the trees, they didn't follow me onto the road. They didn't need to. They stood there, hidden, waiting for the woods to swallow me up again. I haven't gone back since. I won't. Not after knowing how quiet someone can move out there. Not after realizing how easy it is to drift off a trail and walk right into someone else's territory without meaning to. And not after learning that sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't a creature or a story. It's a person who knows those trees better than you do, and who has no reason to let you find your way out. I didn't plan on staying in the woods after dark. That whole day was supposed to be a quick hike, something to clear my head after a long week. I went to a place I had only been to once before, a section of forest that didn't have many marked trails. It was known for being quiet, the kind of place where you could walk for hours without seeing anyone. That was what I wanted that morning. I didn't think about how fast things could go wrong out there when you're alone. The first few hours were fine. The air was cool, and the sun felt warm on my face. The trees were tall and close together, and the ground was soft with old needles and leaves. I kept walking deeper, following a narrow path that looked like an old animal trail. I didn't really have a destination. I just wanted to keep going until my mind felt lighter. But after a while, I noticed I wasn't paying attention to where I was going anymore. I kept taking small turns without thinking. I stepped over fallen logs and walked around thick patches of brush. And at some point, the trail I was following slowly faded away. When I finally stopped and looked around, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The trees all looked the same, tall and dark, blocking most of the sky. The air felt colder, and the woods seemed much denser than before. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. That didn't surprise me. What bothered me more was how fast the light seemed to be fading. It wasn't even late afternoon yet, but the forest was getting darker, and the shadows looked heavier. I told myself I just needed to walk straight in one direction and eventually I'd hit a road, or at least a trail. But the woods didn't feel like they wanted me to do that. Every direction looked the same. Tight trees, thick brush, uneven ground. I picked a direction and started walking, making sure not to drift too much to either side. But the farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. The silence in the woods was strange. Even in dense forests, you expect to hear birds or something moving in the distance, but there was nothing here. It was so quiet that the sound of my own breathing seemed too loud. Even my footsteps sounded sharp on the ground. As I walked, small things started to feel off. I passed the same kind of fallen tree several times. Smooth bark, snapped clean in the middle, branches stripped. The first time I saw it, I didn't think about it. The third time I passed one that looked exactly like it, I felt this cold knot forming in my stomach. I started checking the ground for my own tracks, but the forest floor was too soft and messy to leave anything clear. I kept going anyway. I didn't want to panic, but the deeper I went, the more it felt like the trees were closing around me. The woods grew dim even though the sun should have still been up. I could feel the temperature dropping fast. At one point, I stopped and took a long breath, trying to settle myself, and that was when I heard it. It was faint, but it didn't fit the silence around me. It sounded like a twig snapping, not from my feet, not from an animal scurrying away. It was slow, controlled, like someone stepping lightly but not lightly enough. My whole body tensed. I turned in the direction of the sound, staring into a wall of dark trees. I didn't see anything, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I kept walking, but now I could feel something behind me. I didn't hear footsteps again, not right away, but I felt that pressure you feel when someone is watching you, like a weight on the back of your neck. Every few steps I turned around and stared into the woods, waiting for something to move. Nothing did, but the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger. I picked up my pace. My breathing grew heavier, and my hands wouldn't stay still. Then, about 20 minutes later, I heard another sound. This time it was closer, a soft crunch of leaves. Then another, slow, steady, spaced out. Not running, just following. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I didn't want to run because running through dense woods is a good way to injure yourself. But walking felt too slow. The sounds behind me didn't speed up, but they didn't stop either. They stayed at that same patient pace, like whoever was behind me wasn't worried about catching me. Like they already knew I was stuck out there with them. The woods grew darker with every minute. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, and the shadows turned into one solid mass. I couldn't tell which direction I was going anymore. I just kept moving, breathing hard, wiping sweat off my face even though the air felt cold. I reached a small clearing after a while, a patch of ground where the trees opened up just enough to let some light through. I thought maybe I could orient myself from there, maybe see a slope or some landmark. But before I could figure anything out, I noticed something in the dirt. Footprints, fresh, deep enough to be recent, spaced in a way that looked like someone walking at a normal speed. I knelt down carefully and looked closer. They weren't mine. I knew that instantly because they were bigger and the tread didn't match the pattern on my boots. There were at least 10 of them, all leading into the same section of trees I had just walked through. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I turned toward the other side of the clearing, but the same set of prints continued there, as if someone had moved around the clearing earlier, circling it, maybe watching it. At that point, I didn't care about walking carefully anymore. I headed toward the slope on the far side of the clearing because slopes usually lead to either roads or streams. I stumbled down the hill, scraping my hands on rocks, tripping over roots. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stay upright, but I kept going. I didn't want to be anywhere near those prints. As I moved, I kept hearing small sounds behind me, a shift of weight, leaves being pressed down, a slow, steady rhythm that never hurried, never paused. followed me down the hill. It followed me across an old dry creek bed. It followed me until the woods started thinning just slightly and I saw a narrow strip of sky through the branches. When I finally saw the glint of my truck far ahead through the trees, I felt a rush so strong it almost made me cry. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept moving until I stepped out of the trees and onto the gravel of the old road. My legs nearly gave out. I got into my truck, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. Right as I pulled away, I looked into the woods one last time. Something was standing there between the trees. Tall, still. Its shape was dark, and I couldn't see its face or clothes, but I could see the outline of a person. They weren't moving. They weren't hiding. They were just standing there like they had been waiting for me to leave. I drove away fast and didn't slow down until I reached the highway. To this day, I don't know who or what was following me. I don't know why they were out there, how long they had been walking behind me, or what they planned to do if I hadn't found my way back when I did. But I know what I felt. I know those footprints weren't mine. I know the steps behind me were real. And I know that whoever stood in the trees watching me at the end wasn't lost or confused. They knew exactly where they were, and exactly where I was. I never went back to those woods again, and I never hike off marked trails anymore. Not after knowing how easily someone can move through the trees without being seen. Not after knowing how close they can get without making a sound. Not after learning that the quietest parts of the forest are quiet for a reason, and sometimes the thing you don't see is standing right behind you. I went into the woods that day because I needed to clear my head. I had spent the whole week sitting in my apartment, barely sleeping, unable to stop thinking about work problems that kept piling up. My mind felt foggy and tight, and I believed that being outdoors might help me reset. I picked a forest about an hour and a half away, a place I had never been before but had seen tagged online by hikers. It looked quiet, calm, and far from everything. I left home later than I wanted to. By the time I reached the parking area, the sun was already leaning toward the late afternoon. The small gravel lot was empty except for my car, and the silence around it felt almost too heavy. There were no birds calling, no wind moving through the tall trees. Everything looked still, like the whole forest was waiting for something. I should have taken that as a warning, but I didn't. I just grabbed my backpack, made sure my flashlight and water bottle were inside, locked the car, and walked toward the trailhead. The path started wide, covered in old leaves and soft dirt. The air had a cold bite to it, the kind that settles around your neck and crawls down your back. I noticed the smell of damp earth immediately, the kind you only get from places thick with trees. The deeper I walked, the darker everything looked. The canopy above blocked out most of the light, even though the sun wasn't down yet. I told myself it was normal, just the way some forests were. The first couple of miles felt peaceful. My footsteps crunched through the leaves. My breathing slowly settled into a steady rhythm. The forest around me was quiet, but not in a threatening way, more like a cold, empty kind of quiet. Every few minutes, I saw small birds dart between branches or heard a rustle somewhere far off. Nothing felt wrong at first, but then the trail began to change. The wide open path narrowed into a thin line squeezed between tall pines. The ground became uneven, broken by roots and rocks that forced me to watch my footing. The light dimmed more. A strange stillness settled over everything, as if the forest had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. I walked slower, my eyes scanning the trees on both sides. Somewhere around the third mile, I noticed something unusual. A tree stood on the left side of the trail with a strange mark carved into it. Not letters, not symbols, just a long, deep cut. It wasn't something an animal would do. It was too straight, too clean, like someone used a knife with real force. The exposed wood underneath looked fresh, pale against the dark bark. I walked past it without stopping, but the sight bothered me. A few minutes later, I saw another cut, then another, all on different trees, spaced unevenly but definitely man-made. I kept checking over my shoulder even though I didn't see anyone else on the trail. The stillness of the forest suddenly felt heavier, like something had shifted. As I walked deeper, I noticed the smell of the woods change. It grew damp and mossy, almost sour. I started hearing faint noises. Not footsteps, not animals, just soft taps on the leaves. Far away but somehow timed with my steps. Every time I stopped moving, the taps stopped too. I tried to tell myself it was the forest settling, maybe branches shifting in the cold air, but it didn't feel natural. It felt like something or someone was matching my pace. The trail eventually bent toward a shallow ravine where a thin stream trickled down between slick rocks. The water level was low, making the area quieter than it should have been. The ground here was soft and muddy. My boots sank slightly as I walked along the edge of the stream. That's when I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They were large, deeper than anything I would make, spaced far apart like the person had been walking with purpose. The mud around them still glistened with moisture, meaning they were fresh, very fresh. They led directly along the trail I was following, and the moment I saw them, my chest tightened. I scanned the woods around me, trying to see any sign of movement. Nothing shifted, nothing breathed, but I knew someone else had been there recently, maybe still was. My heart started beating harder, but I didn't turn back. I don't know if it was stubbornness or disbelief. I just kept going, walking faster, watching the trail and the trees more closely. The woods grew darker as I moved deeper. The air felt thick. My hands felt cold even though I kept clenching them to warm up. Then, in a small clearing ahead, I saw something that made me stop immediately. A jacket. It lay crumpled near a fallen log, dirty, torn in one sleeve and covered in leaves. It looked like it had been out there for days but still had bright patches of color on the fabric. Something about the way it was placed, slightly folded, not tossed, made me uneasy. I nudged it with my foot. The fabric was stiff and cold. I didn't see any blood, but the torn sleeve looked like it had been yanked, not cut. I didn't want to think too hard about what that meant. Past the jacket, I spotted another mark on a tree. This one was different. Not a clean cut, but a rough scratch, as if someone had dug something sharp into the bark and dragged it downward with force. It wasn't random. It looked deliberate. The woods around me suddenly felt completely wrong. I felt watched, even though I couldn't see anyone. My breathing grew quicker. The silence seemed to deepen. Every tiny sound, the rustle of a dry leaf, a drop of water hitting the ground, made my nerves jump. I told myself to turn around. I even shifted my weight to do it, but something kept me moving forward, maybe fear, maybe curiosity, maybe just the instinct to get out of the woods by finishing the loop of the trail instead of going back the same way. I walked faster, trying to stay calm even though my head felt tight. I kept glancing behind me, my ears strained to catch any sound. For a few minutes, all I heard was my own breathing. Then I heard it, a soft, heavy crunch in the leaves behind me. Not mine. My spine tightened instantly. I didn't turn back yet. I sped up. My legs moved so fast that I was almost jogging. The crunch came again, slower, but definitely following me. Every hair on my arms lifted. My chest felt hollow. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like a person. Someone who wasn't rushing. Someone who was keeping their distance. Someone who wanted to stay hidden. I finally turned my head. Nothing moved. But I could feel someone there, watching, waiting. I kept going, my boots slamming into the ground. The trail curved sharply and started climbing uphill. My breath turned harsh and hot in my chest. Sweat formed under my jacket even though the air was cold. The shadows between the trees looked like deep tunnels leading into places I didn't want to imagine. When I reached the top of the hill, I spotted something that almost made my legs give out. A campsite. Not a normal one, not a clean one, just a small patch of ground cleared roughly, with a burned circle of ash in the center, some scattered trash around it, and a piece of rope tied to a tree branch low to the ground. The rope was frayed at the end, as if it had been cut or torn. Everything looked abandoned, yet not old enough to be washed away by rain. Someone had been living in the woods, not camping, living, and not long ago. My throat tightened as I backed away from the clearing. The forest behind me felt too quiet again. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, and that scared me even more. Silence meant whoever was there had stopped moving. Maybe watching, maybe waiting. I didn't look back again. I ran. I didn't care about the noise I made. I didn't care about the trail markers. I just ran until my legs shook and my lungs burned. The trees flew past me as the faint light began to fade, but I didn't stop. When I finally saw the opening of the trailhead through the branches, relief washed through me so hard I almost fell. I burst into the empty parking lot, reached my car, and locked the doors the second I got in. My hands shook as I started the engine. My chest felt tight, and I kept checking the mirrors as I drove away. I didn't relax until I was miles from the forest. Clear ending. Later that night, I looked up the area online. I found old local reports. Missing hikers, abandoned camps, strange sightings deep in the woods. A few hikers mentioned being followed without seeing anyone. Several reported carved marks on trees just like the ones I saw. One story described a man who had been living out there for years, avoiding people, hiding whenever someone came close, sometimes watching them from a distance. No one ever caught him. No one even knew exactly who he was. I realized then that I hadn't imagined anything. Someone had been out there. Someone had carved those trees. Someone had left that jacket. Someone had followed me through the quiet, cold woods without showing their face. I was lucky I turned back when I did. Lucky I kept moving. Lucky I didn't stop to investigate too deeply. Because I'm certain now, absolutely certain, that if I had slowed down even once, I wouldn't have made it out of those woods before dark. And I don't think I would have made it out at all. I had decided to hike a remote section of forest that stretched for miles between two small towns. It was early October, the kind of time when the air feels colder in the shade, and the daylight ends earlier than you expect. I had done the trail once before, but that was with friends during summer. This time I was alone, trying to clear my head after a stressful few weeks. I thought fresh air and quiet paths would help me reset. I didn't plan for anything frightening. I didn't even think that something dangerous could happen out there. I parked my car on a small gravel patch and started walking with my backpack. A simple lunch, extra layers, a small knife, and a flashlight. The trail started off clear and packed from use. The first hour felt calm. Tall pines swayed gently, and the dry leaves on the ground made a soft crunch with each step. At that point, the forest looked almost friendly. I was breathing better, thinking I had made a good choice coming out here. But the deeper I went, the more the trail narrowed. The trees grew closer together, branches reaching across the path like thin arms. I noticed how quiet it became. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just my own footsteps. I didn't worry too much at first. I told myself it was just the season and the time of day. Around noon, I stopped at a fallen tree to eat. My legs were starting to feel the weight of the hike, so I took my time. While I ate, I noticed something strange. The forest around me felt like it was holding its breath. It wasn't just quiet, it felt like the woods were listening. There was no movement anywhere. The branches didn't shift. Even the air felt thick. I tried to ignore it, but the stillness made my scalp tighten. When I packed up to continue, I noticed something else. Next to the log where I had been sitting, there were footprints. They looked fairly fresh, pressed clearly into the dirt and leaves. They weren't mine. These prints were heavier, the kind that comes from someone carrying weight or walking with force. I followed them with my eyes and saw that they led off the trail, deeper into the woods. That alone wasn't too alarming. Hunters, campers, or survey workers could have made them. But the thing that bothered me was how the ground around them was untouched. No other tracks. No sign of someone walking in from the opposite direction. Just a line of footprints leading into the trees like the person had appeared there out of nowhere. I tried to shake it off and kept walking. But now I kept turning around every few seconds, checking the trail behind me. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. Still, I felt watched. That feeling stayed with me for the next 2 miles. Eventually, the trail crossed a small stream. Usually, during summer, it was easy to step across the rocks without getting wet. But the water level was higher from recent rain, and the rocks were slick. I crouched to steady myself, and that's when I noticed something on the far bank. Another footprint, pressed deep into the mud. One footprint, no trail leading up to it. Just one, facing toward the woods on the other side. It matched the pattern of the prints I saw earlier. My chest tightened as I climbed across the stream. I scanned the trees across from me, looking for any shape out of place, any movement. But the woods were dead still. Even so, I felt like someone was close. Too close. I pushed forward faster now, wanting to reach the midpoint of the trail where an old fire road branched off. I knew that road led back toward the highway and would give me a faster route back to the car. As I walked, the woods changed again. The trees spaced out more, but the ground was covered in thick brush. I kept hearing small snaps, twigs breaking somewhere behind me. It wasn't rhythmic or constant, but every time I stopped to listen, the sound stopped too. I never saw anyone. I never heard footsteps clearly, just those sharp little breaks, as if someone was matching my pace but staying far enough back to hide. The worst part was that the silence always returned after the snaps, making it impossible to know which direction they came from. I kept walking faster until the trail finally opened up into the fire road clearing. My relief lasted only a few seconds because my eyes landed on something lying on the ground at the start of the road. A backpack. It looked older, weather-worn, the color faded. One strap was torn like someone had yanked it hard. It was half open, and inside I could see a water bottle, a crumpled map, and a dirty sweater. Everything looked like it had been there a while, but not long enough to be buried under leaves. Maybe a few days at most. I didn't want to touch it, but I moved closer to check for an ID tag or something. There was nothing. No name. No signal of who owned it. But next to the backpack, I noticed marks in the dirt. Drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled off the trail and into the brush. They were faint, but they were there. My stomach turned hard. All the sounds from earlier, the quiet, the footprints, the feeling of being watched. It all came together in my mind. I realized I wasn't dealing with animals or random hikers. Someone was out here. Someone who moved quietly. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who might have been following me for miles. I didn't run, but I walked fast down the fire road, never looking back for too long. The road stretched straight ahead, making it easier to see in both directions. That should have made me feel safer, but it didn't. The entire time I walked, I felt exposed, like I was on display, like someone could see every step I took. About 20 minutes down the road, I saw something on the ground again. This time it was a piece of torn fabric, blue, frayed at one side. I didn't recognize it, but it looked like it had been ripped off clothing. A few feet away was another footprint, the same size and pattern as before. Fresh. That was the moment fear stopped being a vague worry and became something real and sharp in my chest. I kept moving, checking the trees on both sides. The brush was high, and if someone wanted to hide, they easily could. Several times I thought I saw shapes between the branches, dark forms low to the ground, but when I looked harder, they were gone. The road eventually curved right and started sloping downward. From here, I knew I was about a mile from the highway. I kept moving, pushing my legs harder. My shoulders ached. Sweat made my shirt cling to my back even though the air was cold. Then I heard it. For the first time, a real sound. A single, heavy footstep on the brush behind me. Not a twig snap this time. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. I didn't turn around. I just moved faster, almost jogging. My breathing turned rough. My hands shook around the straps of my backpack. The woods on both sides felt like they were leaning in toward me. When I finally reached the edge of the highway, the tension snapped all at once. Cars passed every few minutes. The sound of engines felt like safety. I walked along the shoulder until I reached the gravel patch where my car sat alone. Before getting in, I made myself turn around and look at the fire road behind me. The entrance was dark, even though the sun was still up. Nothing moved. No figure stepped out. But the feeling of being watched was still there, heavy on my skin. I drove away quickly, hands tight around the wheel. Even miles from the forest, the feeling didn't fade. Not that day. Not even weeks later. Clear ending. A few days after the hike, I went online to check if anyone had reported a missing person in that area. There were several cases, hikers who went off-trail, campers who vanished, all within the past few years. None of them were found. Reading through the reports, I recognized one description: a man around my age who went missing last fall. The police found only his abandoned backpack near a fire road, the same place where I saw the torn backpack lying in the dirt. I realized how close I had been to ending up like him. Someone was out there in those woods. Someone who knew the land better than anyone. Someone who moved without sound. Someone who waited. I never saw their face. I never heard their voice. But they were there, following me for miles, watching me the entire time. And I know, without any doubt, that if I had stopped for just a little too long or walked the wrong way off that trail, I wouldn't have made it back to my car. I haven't gone hiking alone since. I don't think I ever will again. I didn't plan on ending up deep in those woods that day. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon hike after a long week at work. My head felt crowded, and I needed the kind of quiet only trees could give. There was a state forest about an hour outside the city. Nothing special, not even popular, which was exactly what I wanted. No crowds, no noise, just an empty trail and a few hours alone. The air felt cool when I stepped out of the car. It was late October, and the leaves were already halfway down. The woods looked like someone had taken all the colors of fall and thrown them in piles across the ground. The trail entrance was empty. My car was the only one in the small dirt lot, which felt nice at first. Peaceful, calm, a place where nothing bad could happen. I grabbed a small backpack with only the basics and started walking. The trail was soft under my boots, covered in yellow leaves that crackled lightly with every step. The forest looked beautiful in that quiet way only late fall can create. Bare branches mixed with bright red and orange trees, and the air smelled like cold earth and old leaves. I walked for almost an hour without thinking about much. Just breathing, listening, taking everything in. The trail twisted between tall oaks and thin birches, and eventually it sloped uphill into an older part of the forest. The trees grew denser there, taller, thicker, with less sunlight reaching the ground. It felt colder the deeper I went. About halfway up the hill, I noticed the first detail that made me uneasy. Something small, barely nothing, but enough to interrupt the calm I had been sinking into. A single boot print in the mud. It wasn't old. The edges were sharp. The tread looked deep. Someone else had been here recently. That shouldn't have been strange, but what bothered me was that the print wasn't on the trail. It was off to the side, pointed toward the trees, like someone had stepped off and walked into the woods. When I looked closer, I realized there were more prints, messy and uneven, spreading deeper into the trees instead of following the trail. I stood there a moment, staring into the woods. Nothing moved. The trees were still. The air felt strangely quiet, like sound had drained out of the area. Finally, I told myself it didn't matter. People wandered off-trail all the time. I kept walking. The higher I climbed, the darker it got. The trail grew narrower, roots curling out like bones from under the dirt. I could hear my own breathing louder than before. I walked another 20 minutes until I reached a flat area near the top. The trail split there, forming a T-shape. I wasn't planning on going much farther, so I stopped near an old fallen tree to drink some water. That was when I heard the first sound. A single crack of a branch breaking. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't small either. It came from somewhere behind me, deep in the woods. At first I thought it might be a deer, maybe a fox, something normal. But the sound of the branch breaking was heavy, like someone had stepped on it with actual weight. I stayed still for a few seconds, listening. Nothing followed. No rustling, no movement, no breathing, just silence. I brushed it off, even though the back of my neck felt tight. I put the bottle away and started down the left side of the split, figuring I'd walk another few minutes before turning back. Maybe 5 minutes later, I heard it again. Another crack, this time closer, and again heavy. My heart beat faster now. I stopped walking. The air around me felt thicker, colder, heavier. I could feel my pulse in my hands. I turned slowly, scanning the trees behind me. But everything looked the same. Brown trunks, fallen leaves, low branches, nothing unusual. No movement, no shape. I took one slow step backward. That's when I saw it. Not a person, not an animal. A shape behind a tree. Just a shoulder. A sleeve. A piece of someone's clothing sticking out from behind the trunk of an old oak far off the trail. Someone was standing there, watching me, half hidden. My whole body turned cold. I froze in place. Whoever it was didn't move. They just stood there, as if waiting for me to do something. I didn't run. I didn't breathe loudly. I just turned and walked back the way I came, as calmly as I could. Every part of me focused on keeping the pace steady. I didn't want to show panic. I didn't want them to hear fear in the way my legs hit the ground. I knew they were too far to hear breathing, but fear makes the mind think strange things. I walked faster once the trees hid the slope behind me. I didn't look back. The trail felt longer than before, like it had stretched out. My hands were shaking, and the more I moved downhill, the more I realized something else. I didn't hear birds anymore. I didn't hear wind through the branches. I didn't hear anything except my own footsteps. Halfway down the hill, I finally let myself glance back. Someone was there. Not close, not running, but far back on the trail, barely visible between the trees. A figure, standing still, watching. My legs almost gave out. I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't want to break into a run yet, because I didn't want to signal that I knew they were following. But the thought that they had stepped onto the trail behind me made my skin crawl. The woods bent around a curve, and once the trees blocked the view, I sped up. My heartbeat felt like it was shaking my chest. Every sound behind me made me think they were closer. Every rustle felt like footsteps. When I reached the lower part of the trail, the sunlight started returning. It wasn't bright, but compared to the ridge, it felt safer. I kept moving fast, almost running now, my boots sliding on the leaves. About halfway back to the parking lot, I heard it again. Footsteps, not loud but steady, human, following at a distance. My body filled with cold panic. I didn't turn around. I didn't slow down. I only pushed myself faster, almost sprinting now, the backpack bouncing against me. The parking lot finally appeared through the trees. The sight of my car felt unreal, like a lifeline. I ran the last stretch, unlocked the door with shaking hands, threw myself inside, and locked all the doors immediately. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to look calm even though I felt like I was shaking apart. I looked toward the trail entrance. No one came out. I waited 30 seconds. Nothing. I waited a full minute. Still nothing. Finally, I started the car. My hands slipped on the keys the first time. When the engine turned on, I felt some tiny piece of safety return. I backed out of the lot as fast as I could without skidding, and as I pulled onto the main road, I checked the mirror one last time. That was when I saw movement. A figure stepping out from the trees near the trail entrance, just enough to be seen. Not running, not waving, just standing there, watching my car leave. I drove all the way to the nearest town before stopping. My hands were still shaking so hard I could barely hold a water bottle. I sat there in a gas station parking lot for almost 10 minutes, just staring out the windshield, trying to understand what had happened. There were no ghosts in those woods, no monsters, nothing supernatural, just a person, a real person who had followed me, a person who stood behind a tree, watched me for who knows how long, stepped out onto the trail behind me when I walked away, and kept just far enough back to stay hidden. Someone who didn't try to talk, didn't make noise, didn't pretend to be lost. Someone who simply watched. What scared me the most wasn't what they did. It was what they didn't do. They didn't call out for help. They didn't ask where the trail led. They didn't try to get my attention. They didn't run or rush or act confused. They just followed me in silence. A person who moves like that has a reason. A person who hides and watches isn't someone you want behind you in the woods. I never reported it because I didn't know what to say. I never saw their face. I never saw their hands. I only saw part of a sleeve, then later a shape behind me on the trail. But I know what I felt. I know how the air changed when they stepped behind that tree. I know how the woods went silent. And I know the heavy footsteps I heard were from a person, not an animal. I haven't gone hiking alone since. Maybe one day I will again, but not in those woods and not anywhere empty. I learned something that day. something I can't unlearn no matter how much time passes. The scariest thing in the woods isn't the darkness, or the silence, or the wild animals. It's another human being who doesn't want you to know they're there. Because the moment you realize they've been watching you longer than you thought, it's already too late. I still think about that night in the woods more often than I want to. It comes back to me in small flashes, usually when I'm alone or when I hear something moving outside my window. It wasn't supposed to be anything special. I just wanted a quiet weekend alone, a simple break from everything. I picked a forested area a couple hours from home, a small state park I'd visited once as a kid. I remembered the trees being tall and the trails being empty, and that was exactly what I needed. The drive there felt oddly peaceful. The deeper I went, the more the cell signal dropped until it disappeared completely. I didn't mind at first. I wanted the silence. I wanted my head to clear. The sun was already dipping when I reached the trailhead lot. There were only 2 other cars parked there, both dusty, both looking like they'd been sitting for a while. I checked the map nailed to the wooden post and picked a path that looped around a small lake deep in the woods. My plan was simple. Hike in, set up camp, spend the night, hike out early the next morning. Nothing complicated, nothing risky. The start of the trail felt easy. The trees were spaced out wider near the entrance, and the forest floor was covered in soft pine needles. But the deeper I walked, the more the trail narrowed. The branches hung lower, and the woods grew darker even before the sun fully set. I took it slow, listening to the crunch of leaves under my boots, trying to enjoy the quiet. By the time I reached the lake, the sky had turned a deep orange. The lake itself barely moved, its surface like smooth glass. I found a small clearing a short walk from the shore and set up my tent. I boiled some water, ate a simple meal, and sat on a fallen log while the temperature dropped. As the sky turned black, the woods around me came alive with different sounds. Most of it was normal, crickets, small animals in the brush, the wind shifting through the branches. But some of it felt heavier, slower, like something larger was moving farther out in the dark. I told myself it was a deer, maybe an elk. That area had both. For a while, everything was calm. I sat by the small fire I had made, staring at the glowing embers. But then I felt something. Not loud, not obvious. Just a subtle change. The way the woods suddenly went quiet. The way the night air felt heavier around me. At first I thought maybe a predator had wandered close. A cougar or a bear. They could silence an entire patch of forest without meaning to. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly turned my head toward the direction the feeling seemed to come from. That's when I noticed the sound. A faint crunch. Then another. Slow, careful, as if something was trying not to be heard but still failing. The steps weren't the quick, scattered movements of a small animal. They were slow and spaced out like something walking on 2 feet. My throat tightened. I stayed perfectly still, trying to make sense of it. I scanned the darkness with the flashlight, but the beam only reached a few trees deep. Everything beyond that was swallowed in blackness. The sound stopped. For a long time, I remained frozen. I didn't know what direction it had come from anymore, because the woods echoed and warped sounds at night. The silence stretched on until it felt unnatural. Eventually, I convinced myself it could have been another hiker. Maybe one of the cars in the lot belonged to them. Maybe they were walking back to their campsite. I tried to settle down, letting the fire burn lower, then finally climbed into my tent. Inside, everything felt smaller, like the thin nylon walls were doing nothing to protect me. I lay down on my sleeping bag and tried to breathe slow. For a while, nothing happened. I actually started drifting off. Then I woke up to another sound. A soft, deliberate crunch of leaves. Very close. My eyes snapped open. The darkness inside the tent felt suffocating. The steps were right outside my camp now, moving slowly in a small arc around the tent, pausing and then continuing again. My heart hammered so hard I thought whoever or whatever was out there could hear it. The steps circled halfway, then stopped right beside the tent. Not moving, not shifting, just standing there. I didn't dare reach for the flashlight at first. I didn't even dare breathe too loudly. I lay perfectly still, staring upward, feeling my pulse in every part of my body. Then the sound came. Not a footstep this time. Something like a slow inhale. Person's breath. I felt cold all over. I tried to tell myself it could be an animal, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Animals didn't move like that. They didn't stand still like that. They didn't breathe like that. After several long minutes, the sound drifted away. Soft footsteps, retreating into the woods until they were gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay awake, gripping my small knife, listening to every noise. When the first thin line of morning light touched the tent, I got up immediately. My legs were stiff and shaky, and my head hurt from clenching my jaw all night. I stepped outside and looked around the camp. The ground was disturbed in a few places. Leaves pushed aside. Faint impressions that could have been from boots, though not clear enough to be certain. I packed everything in less than 5 minutes. I just wanted to leave. The air felt wrong, like the woods still held something from the night before. On the hike back, I kept glancing behind me. The trail felt different in the daylight, but not in a comforting way. The trees felt too close. The silence felt heavy again. A couple times I thought I heard something behind me. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching. But when I stopped, everything went still. About halfway back, I found something that stopped me cold. A footprint. Not mine. Not old. Pressed deep into the mud on the trail, facing the same direction I was heading. Someone had walked the same path either very late at night or early in the morning. Someone who hadn't been there when I arrived the previous evening. The footprint wasn't big, but it was fresh. Fresh enough that the edges were still sharp and clean. Fresh enough that it couldn't have been more than a couple hours old. I scanned the trees around me, turning slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. Nothing stood out. No sound. No movement. But the feeling that someone was nearby hit me all over again. The rest of the hike felt like a blur. I kept my pace fast but steady, never running, trying not to trip or make myself look weak. My back prickled the entire time, like eyes were on me, watching, matching my steps. When I finally saw the parking lot through the trees, my knees almost gave out. But something made me stop for just a second. One of the cars that had been there the night before was gone. Only one remained besides mine. I didn't waste time trying to figure out anything else. I tossed my gear in the car, locked the doors, and drove out of there faster than I should have. It wasn't until I reached a town with cell signal that I finally let myself breathe normally again. Even now, years later, I still don't know who was out there. Maybe it was someone living illegally in the woods. Maybe a drifter. Maybe someone who waited until people camped alone to get close to them. What scares me most is how deliberate the steps had sounded. How slow, how careful. Like the person wanted to study me, not scare me off. The one clear thing I know is this. Whoever it was that circled my tent that night moved like someone who had done it before. Someone who knew how to stay hidden. Someone who watched from just far enough away to feel safe, but close enough to reach me if they wanted to. Nothing happened to me physically, but that night changed how I see the woods forever. Now, whenever I go hiking, even on popular trails, I pay attention to every sound, every footprint, every shift in the air. Because the scariest part wasn't the footsteps or the breathing. It was the moment I realized the person outside my tent had left without taking anything, without touching me, without causing harm. They didn't want anything that night. They were just watching. And walking away didn't make me safe. It only meant they weren't finished. And I know for a fact, they knew exactly where my tent was. They knew I was alone. And they knew I couldn't see them at all. I still don't know why I went into those woods that day. It was late October, cold enough that the ground felt hard under my boots, but warm enough in the afternoon sun that hiking still felt good. I had been stressed for weeks, and I thought getting out into the quiet would clear my mind. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just grabbed my pack, filled my water bottle, and drove toward a stretch of forest I had never explored before. That was my first mistake, picking a place I didn't know. The trail started out clear, wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The leaves were turning dark yellow, and they crunched under my feet as I moved farther into the trees. At first everything felt normal. There was a soft wind that pushed through the branches and made them creak a little. I could hear a few birds. The sun came through the leaves in patches, warm and bright. I actually felt relaxed for the first time in a while. But the farther I went, the more the trail narrowed. After about an hour, it split into two small paths, neither marked. I had no reason to pick one over the other, so I went left, thinking I'd loop around eventually. But the trail faded fast. What started as a path turned into a thin line of packed dirt, then into nothing. Soon I was walking over roots and rocks, guessing my direction. I could still hear the wind sometimes, but everything else grew quiet. I kept going because I didn't feel lost yet. I thought I could turn around whenever I wanted. But turns in the woods don't work the way you think. Everything starts to look the same tall trees, the same moss-covered trunks, the same uneven patches of ground. I didn't notice how far I had drifted until the sunlight started to shift and I realized I couldn't remember the last fork I took. I stopped for a moment and listened. That was when I felt the first hint of something wrong. The woods were too still. Even the wind had died down. There were no birds anymore. No insects. Nothing. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling, but my stomach tightened with every second I listened to that unnatural quiet. I decided to turn back. I walked in the direction I thought I came from, trying to recognize trees or fallen logs, but everything blended together. The more I walked, the more I felt like I was only getting deeper into the woods instead of heading out. My phone had no signal, and my map app couldn't load anything. The battery was already dropping faster than I liked. After another 20 minutes, the light started to fade. The trees grew closer together, blocking what was left of the sun. The air got colder. I could see my breath in the air, thin and soft. I was starting to panic, trying to keep myself calm by focusing on each step, but that only made the silence feel heavier. My heartbeat felt too loud. My breathing sounded too sharp. Then I heard it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even close. But it was the first sound the woods had given me in over an hour. A single crack of a branch. Clean. Snapped. Not from the wind and not from me. It sounded like something stepping down slowly, trying not to make noise but failing just a little. I froze. My whole body went still. I didn't breathe at first. I stared into the trees, but the shadows were thick and dark. I couldn't see anything moving, but I felt it. I felt that prickling on the back of my neck that told me I wasn't alone. I waited, listening so hard that my head hurt. A long moment passed, then another faint sound came, this time a soft shift of leaves. Slow, careful, like whatever was there wasn't rushing. It was just tracking me. I turned and started walking again, faster than before. My footsteps sounded too loud, too rushed. Every time I stepped, I expected to hear another sound behind me, but the woods stayed silent. I kept imagining something moving between the trees, matching my pace, always just behind me where I couldn't see it. Eventually, I reached a slope. The ground dropped sharply downward, almost like a shallow ravine. I figured going downhill might help me find a stream or a road, so I followed the slope, grabbing at roots and branches to keep from slipping. The deeper I went, the darker it became. The trees on both sides leaned in, crowding above me, shutting out what little daylight remained. Halfway down, I found something in the dirt that stopped me completely. Footprints. Fresh ones. Deep ones. And they weren't mine. They were longer and the tread pattern was different. They led down the slope in the same direction I was heading. At first, I tried to convince myself they belonged to another hiker, someone who went through earlier, someone long gone. But something about them didn't sit right. They were too recent, too clean. The edges hadn't softened. The leaves around them were still pushed aside. And what bothered me most was the way they were spaced. Wide apart, steady, deliberate. Someone had been walking through here with purpose. I kept going because I didn't have any other choice, but now my heart was racing. Every few steps I checked over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing behind me. The woods felt heavier with every minute, like the shadows were thickening, pulling everything down. About 15 minutes later, the slope leveled out into a flatter area. The ground, there was a mix of mud and old leaves, and I saw something even worse than the footprints. A small, torn piece of fabric stuck on a branch. It was dark green, thin, like from a jacket sleeve or a backpack. It looked fresh, not weathered or dirty. Someone had passed through recently enough to leave it behind. And the direction the fabric faced didn't match the way I had been walking. It pointed toward a cluster of trees, as if whoever left it had been brushing against branches while moving quietly, maybe even trying to stay hidden. My whole body felt hot and cold at the same time. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's space, like I had crossed into an area I shouldn't have been in. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. They felt watched. I started walking faster, almost jogging, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my throat. I didn't care how noisy I was anymore. I just wanted to get out. Every few steps, I heard something. Maybe real, maybe just my fear, like a soft crack behind me or the faint sound of leaves shifting under weight. I didn't look back. I couldn't make myself. I don't know how long I walked like that. The sky kept getting darker until the only light came from the last thin stripe of evening filtering through the branches. My legs hurt. My hands were shaking. My throat felt dry. Then, through the trees ahead, I finally saw something man-made, straight lines, not natural. A fence. Old, rusty, leaning sideways. But a fence meant people. A fence meant a boundary. I pushed through the brush, grabbed the cold metal, and followed it. After about 10 minutes, I saw a break in the trees. Clearing. A dirt road. And just beyond it, a wide gravel pull-off. My car. I don't think I've ever felt relief like that in my life. I ran the last few yards. My keys almost slipped out of my hand because I was shaking so hard. I unlocked the door, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. I sat there breathing fast, staring at the tree line. And then I saw something. A figure, tall, still, standing between two trees. Not hiding, not moving, just watching. I couldn't see a face or details, just the outline of a person. They didn't step forward. They didn't follow me. They just stood there like they had been there the whole time. I started the engine and drove away without looking back again. I don't know who that person was. I don't know how long they were following me, or why they stayed hidden until the end. Maybe they were camping illegally out there. Maybe they were living in those woods. Or maybe they were waiting for someone who wandered too far off the trail. But I know they weren't lost. They knew those woods better than I ever could. They moved through them without a sound. They watched me from close enough to leave footprints ahead of me. And they made sure I knew, just before I left, that I hadn't imagined any of it. I haven't gone back to that forest since. And now, whenever I hike, I stay on marked paths around other people, where sounds belong and the woods feel like woods. Not like a place where someone is standing just out of sight, waiting for you to take one wrong turn.